it was a long year. And it's funny, it kind of bled into the pandemic. Our show was canceled as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And when you say, you keep redefining yourself, I think it's a beautiful way to put it. And when we look back, it looks like that. But while it was happening, it was very messy. It was, we just bought a house. This show's gone. I have always been at shows that last for a long time. So most likely I'm not going anywhere. And now my show's gone and we're moving in a pandemic with 3 babies. And I don't know if I have a job, and so many things were going on that I just found myself reeling. And when I reel, I look for familiar things, whether it's a place, faces, smells. I seek something that makes me feel at home. And we had left our home. So now I had to cling to these faces, which I love, near me, but I'm also supposed to be their mom and their leader. And so my greatest confidant through all of it was my husband, who's been very aware. He doesn't always know what to say, but he knows to listen and to hug me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he's grown a lot because we've done therapy together. And without him, I don't know how I would have survived all of this.
Even just going back to even just like being public about postpartum depression, like how was that for you at a period of time when you were holding on to so much and there was so much shifting even before, Stray and Sara and Kiki, closed their beautiful doors? There was, that shift of like your first time, and I'm assuming so, where it kind of was written into your storyline a little bit. Like you were starting to have conversations with other moms who were dealing with postpartum depression, or at least from an outsider's point of view looking in, from the moments that I got to spend on set with you guys. It was liberating for me to watch that the show was kind of intertwining mental health and well-being, and also a little bit more of like your story behind the scenes and how Sara shows up for Sara. But what was that like? Was that hard for you in the beginning to be able to be so honest about it? Or do you feel like afterwards you were like, oh wow, actually this might have been something I should have said a long time ago, because it's now giving me permission to take those mental health days?
So I think I've always found it cathartic to talk about these things, mainly because I think I'd love to say I'm this selfless, altruistic martyr of causes, but I'm really looking for someone to say me too. Like I felt that, like I'm looking to not be different, to not be weird, to not be broken, So oftentimes the motivation is for me, like, let me talk about it. I just need one person to raise their hand and say, you're not alone, girl. Like I've been there. Yeah. And every time a new phase happens, one hand is not enough. So every new bout, every new struggle, you need another person, because you're back in the dark space and you have to trust when you can't see much that other people can. And they're like, you'll get out. It's okay. Been there. You're constantly looking for your community. And I think in every time, that's always been the motivation. It was really hard during those 2 years. That I always say those 2 years because it pretty much was bookended by those 2 years on the show. Yeah. I remember there was a time where John Quijones invited me to be on What Would You Do? And it was going to be an episode about postpartum. And that show is about actors portraying scenarios, and will regular people, or I would say ordinary, but so many are extraordinary in those situations, would they intervene? So we're watching, and from the truck, I get a chime into the actor's ears. It's a woman and a man, and they're having a conversation, and the woman's pretty much expressing postpartum things, and the man, the dad or husband, is saying, "Oh, buck it up," whatever. John turned to me and he said, "Now, would you like to go in and play the part? Would you like to try your hand at a different scenario?" And I was so ready to, because what he didn't know is I was having postpartum and I was in those months right after my baby. And so many people were seeing those emotions. For me, I needed that moment, because I was real life, real time looking for someone to say, you're fine, and it was a lot, it was. And when you talk about it, when you're going through it, you're not quite as strong, because now you're vulnerable again. You're saying, I'm in it. I don't know how to answer this with the clarity and removal to give it its due. So oftentimes it's much easier when you're out of those times to talk about it, because you're back on your strong legs. You see the world for what it is. You're feeling hopeful and you're good. I happened to be talking about it during that time while not wanting to simultaneously say BT dubs, like I'm actually really not in a good place. There was a time at work where I did have to mention it because it was getting to the point where I'd have episodes, I'd come home, and it was the first time it ever interfered with my job. Usually the adrenaline of live TV almost made me so present that I couldn't struggle. And it was starting to get to the point where I'd go to speak and I'd forget what I was going to say, or I'd make mistakes, like throwing to a commercial. And Michael and my bosses didn't necessarily know. And they're like, you knew that that wasn't commercial. And you're like, yeah. And then I'd go back to my dressing room and I'd just bawl. So I finally called my boss in because I thought I need to create a safety net for people to know I'm not okay.
Yeah.
Because if you can't say that later when they call you and say you haven't been performing and you're like, oh, by the way, I'm not doing well. You got to do it, for your own security and safety, not just support, but legally for your job. So that was the first time I had to take it to my workplace and have a closed door meeting where I'm like, I need you to be aware of this. So
yeah. Well, I also think what I hear is like, when you went on to that show was the first time where you felt like you could validate your feelings. It was the first time where actually Sara got to show up sort of as Sara on live television, but putting herself in other shoes and being able to relate that emotion through someone else. And that's that's why I think I connect as an actor, is because for so long, the trauma that I've been through as a young girl, I didn't know where to put those emotions, but it felt comfortable to put those emotions through somebody else's story and be able to still be able to let them just like flow through me, and people still see me, right? But they're seeing me, but they're not seeing me, but they aren't, and I think that was the same with you. It's like, I'm here as Sara, but I'm not here as Sara, but oh my God, it feels so good that people get to see Sara, and it's like, you were just like letting it go onto the floor. And for the first time, it was like, oh my God, actually, maybe there are other people that may relate to this and say that it's okay that like I am going through this and I can't keep it in my head for too long. Because one of the things you said before, which I really resonate with, is when you start to keep things in your head and you start to feel these things, you judge everything that goes on around you. And then unfortunately you do start to lose the line, or you do start to, jump into a different fantasy because you're so consumed with trying to hide actually all the pain that's going on inside you that you don't know how to actually connect physically anymore. And for anybody who's listening, it's one of those things of, could you imagine Sara being in her shoes and then having to show up every day and how, I mean, I just hear your story and I just want to hug you and just say like, wow,